Greetings, revisionist fiction students. I just wanted to do a quick welcome video. I had accidentally posted an older video on the class site, so my apologies for that bit of confusion. Um, that was from 2018, I believe, or maybe a little bit earlier. We used to have longer sessions here at Lindenwood, so we were able to cover more material. But in this new kind of compact approach we've had for the last couple of years. We've had to shorten the reading list, but you get to take more courses per year, so that's a good thing. So revisionist fiction, that's something I've been interested in for quite a while. I've written about it elsewhere at the site, so you may well be reading or have read about that. But I've written several works that would certainly count as revisionist fiction, which is basically where you take a well-known, perhaps even classic text and rework it somehow, use it for inspiration for your own writing. Sometimes the term fan fiction is used somewhat synonymously with revisionist fiction. I think there's a difference, but it's certainly not official. And so, one of the things I want to talk about with you this session and have you think about is if there is a difference between revisionist fiction and fan fiction, and if so, what are they? And if not, which is fine, if that's the conclusion you reach, what are their commonalities that you see to be so important? We're mainly going to look at two foundational texts, and then for each, we're going to look at two revised texts that have been written pretty recently, very recently in some cases. And ultimately, what we're going to do is ask you to do your own revisionist work based on one of those foundational texts. The first text we're going to look at in terms of foundational text is the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf. Some of you may be familiar with Beowulf. Oftentimes in high school or in undergraduate classes at college, you'll run into Beowulf, most likely an excerpt of Beowulf. But we're going to read the whole enchilada, if you will. Now I've put the Roy Liuzza text on the syllabus. Really any version of Beowulf will do. There are lots and lots of them out there. There are some poetry versions like Liuzza's. There are some prose versions, and there are some that kind of bridge the gap in between. There certainly are versions online which are very good. But as we will talk about further as we go, the original poem, of course, was published, or not published, but was composed rather, in Old English, or otherwise known as Anglo-Saxon. So that is a distant ancestor of our modern English, but so distant that we need a modern English translation to make sense of it. So that's where all these various versions come into play. But we're going to read the whole poem, and it's not super long. But we'll look at that, and then we will look at a couple of revisionist works that were inspired by the original Anglo-Saxon poem. One of those we're going to look at is Grendel's Mother by Susan Signa Morrison. I'm sorry, I'm not saying her middle name correctly, probably. But this is an interesting text, interesting take on the original that we'll get into. And then we're going to read John Gardner's novel Grendel. This is one of my favorite books, period. Certainly one of my favorite revisionist works on Beowulf, but just of any books, it's my favorite, or way up there at least. And so we'll be taking a look at that next. And one of the things, of course, we'll do as we go through these books is to talk about what each author drew from the original. What were they inspired by? What did they kind of use verbatim, if you will, and what did they then sort of come up with creatively on their own, which is a lot of things. So we'll kind of be looking at them all within that context. Then in the second half of the session, we're going to read the New Testament. I put this version of the Bible, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, as a recommended text. But again, like with Beowulf, really any version of the New Testament will do. we're going to be looking at it, as a narrative and not really getting into any sort of religious issues. If you and you're writing about it want to comment, within that context, you're certainly welcome to. But we're essentially going to be looking at, again, stories of the New Testament, and particularly around Jesus and the crucifixion and so forth, as narrative, as story. And then after we read this foundational text, we're going to read a couple of revisionist works, a work in translation by Par Lagervis Barabbas, which again is a really neat reinterpretation of that section of the Bible. And then also a very recent novel, Colm Toibin's The Testimony of Mary. Both of these are really, really interesting works. Everything we're looking at is fairly short, especially in terms of the revisionist works. I don't want to get too bogged down in reading long texts, because obviously I want to focus on the analysis of those texts, and especially the analysis from a creative writing standpoint, looking at them as a text that we could possibly use for our own revisionist kind of work. So after we work our way through the two foundational texts, then after each looking at some revised versions of them, your final project will be to hopefully write something where you've been inspired by one of the two foundational texts as well. Obviously, we'll have plenty of time to talk about that as we lead up to that final project. But that is sort of the course in a nutshell. I do teach another revisionist course for Lindenwood. That one is specifically focused on the works of Shakespeare, where we look at three of Shakespeare's plays, and then we look at three novels that were specifically written based on each of those plays. So that's a different course, same kind of idea, but with a very narrow focus in terms of looking at Shakespeare. This one's a little bit broader, where we look at other texts. In this case, this go around, we're going to be looking at Beowulf and then the New Testament. As I've said in the course material, the idea is to write a weekly discussion post. I think different instructors may have somewhat different expectations regarding the timing of all that. What I encourage you to do is to post your discussion response for the week by the end of the evening on Friday, ideally, of each week. And then that will give us all the weekend to look at each other's posts, because I am asking you that you comment on at least two of your classmates' posts as well. Obviously, you can go and comment on more, and you can get a dialogue going. There's quite a bit of back and forth. That would be great. But at least the one discussion post by Friday at the end of the evening, and then by Sunday at the end of the evening, hopefully you've had a chance to read your classmates' work and comment, as I said, at least on two of those posts. The other thing that I do is, I think, a little bit different than some instructors. I use the announcements function in Canvas a little bit differently. I do use it for announcements, just to give you information about the course, etc. But also, I use the announcement function to share with you more material. So after we read a given text, whether it's one of the foundational texts or one of the revised versions, I will, the following week, post an announcement, which usually has the heading something like notes on Beowulf, for example, notes on Grendel, and try to provide you some additional sort of perspectives on that text, and ask you to read that. And I always have a question, or maybe kind of a multi-part question at the end of those notes, which I do ask you to respond to. These are ungraded. Unlike the weekly discussion posts, which will get you a grade, the announcements, which have the notes on heading and ask you a question at the end, those are basically just kind of class discussion. They're not graded, so feel free to just sort of let your hair down, so to speak, and respond as you like. Your responses don't have to be long, although sometimes people do give pretty detailed and in-depth responses. I find that a lot of students at the end of the session say that the announcements, the notes on discussions that we do, after reading the material is some of their favorites and most valuable parts of the course. So I do ask you to do those, even though they're not graded, and I ask you to take them seriously. So be on the lookout for that. Obviously, I'll try to keep you apprised of all that and make sure everyone's kind of on board. If a week or two goes by and you don't get to the notes as far as responding to them, I will send you kind of a little friendly reminder asking you to please do that, because I do think it's a really important part of the course. I guess the last thing I would say is if you do have any questions, please email me. There is a discussion topic in the discussion board to ask me questions, and I do try to monitor that, but quite honestly, sometimes those kind of slip past me, at least for a while. And so I would definitely encourage you to email me if you have a question or a concern about the course. Those I get alerts about on my phone, so I tend to respond to those very quickly. Oftentimes, your question is about some mechanical aspect of the course, and I often find that the response that I need to give you is actually something everyone would benefit from. So oftentimes, in addition to responding to you, I'll go ahead and turn my response into an announcement so everyone can benefit from that. And not naming you, of course, as someone who asked a question. But if you're a little bit confused or need some clarification or what have you, odds are pretty good somebody else does too, and maybe they just haven't posted the question yet to me. So I'll turn that answer into an announcement so everyone can benefit from that insight or illumination, whatever you may have. So that's it. I want to keep this pretty brief. I really appreciate your signing up for this course. I really enjoy teaching it, and I look forward to working with you over the next few weeks.